The cantina on Nexus Prime reeked of alien sweat and desperation. Smoke from burning herb sticks filled the air, mixing with the stench of fear that seemed to cling to every surface. In the darkest corner, away from the flickering neon lights, Kethfer nursed his third bottle of fermented spirits. The amber liquid burned his throat, but it was nothing compared to the memories that burned in his mind. His cybernetic arm clicked against the metal table with each slight movement, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. 3 limbs torn away. By human weapons, half his face reconstructed with biomesh that never quite felt natural. The artificial skin pulled tight when he tried to smile, so he'd stopped trying years ago. Purple scars crisscrossed his remaining flesh like a road map of pain. "Tell me about the humans," whispered Jixstar, sliding into the seat across from him. The young Vorthan soldier had been watching him for an hour, working up the courage to approach. His scales still gleamed with youth, unmarked by battle scars. Bright green, like fresh spring grass on his homeworld, Kethfer's remaining eye fixed on the recruit. The organic one was gone, replaced by a mechanical sensor that glowed red in the dim light. "You want war stories, youngling? Pretty tales of glory and honor?" His laugh was bitter, more of a growl than actual humor. There was no glory in fighting humans, only survival. The veteran's clawed hand trembled as he reached for his drink. Even now, 3 years after the war's end, his nerves were shot. Night terrors plagued his sleep. The sound of human voices on the station's comm system made him jump at me and see a broken old warrior. "But I was once like you, eager, confident, ready to bring the Coalition's might to bear against any enemy." Jixstar leaned forward, his young eyes bright with curiosity. "My training instructor said humans were the fiercest opponents we ever faced, but surely they couldn't match Vorthon's strength." Kethfer snorted. "Boy, I could break a human in half with one hand. Most of us could. But that meant nothing when they started shooting." He gestured to his mechanical limbs. "These aren't trophies of victory. They're reminders of defeat." The old warrior's voice grew distant as he began to remember. "It started when we found their little blue world. Earth, they called it. Such a simple name for such a complex species. The Coalition's first scout reports described them as barely past their industrial age. No energy shields, crude chemical weapons, pathetic ships that couldn't even break light. Speed." He paused to take another drink, the liquid sloshing in the bottle. High Command was excited. New species to bring into the fold. Resources to exploit. Another world to add to the Coalition's empire. The estimated conquest would take maybe 6 cycles. Clean, efficient, profitable. "What went wrong?" Jixstar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Everything." Kethfer's mechanical. I worried as it focused on something beyond the cantina walls. The first diplomatic mission should have been routine. Ambassador Vextel took a small fleet to their system. Standard procedures show overwhelming force, demand submission, accept surrender. The veteran's claws scraped against the table's surface, but humans don't think like us. They don't understand overwhelming force. They see it as a challenge. When our ships entered their space, instead of cowering, they mobilized their entire planet. Their leader back then was a woman named President Minji. It's tough as Starforged steel, that one. She stood before our ambassador and said something that should have warned us about what we were dealing with. Kethfer's voice took on a mocking tone. "We'd rather die free than live as slaves." Typical human nonsense, we thought. Jixstar shifted in his seat. But surely they had to see reason. Coalition's might spans half the galaxy. That's what we thought too. The old warriors' laugh was hollow. Ambassador Vexel gave them 1 rotation to consider surrender. Instead, they used that time to prepare for war. When our deadline passed, they sent a single message back to our fleet. The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the very air was holding its breath. It was from their military commander, General Wu Jin, just for words, "Come and take it." That's when we knew we weren't dealing with a normal species. Any sane civilization would have negotiated, tried to find common ground, looked for a peaceful solution. Kethfer's mechanical fingers drummed against the table. But humans aren't sane. They're something else entirely. something that shouldn't exist in a civilized galaxy. They took our ultimatum as a declaration of war and responded in kind. The Coalition deployed the 7th Fleet. 50,000 ships, enough firepower to glass a dozen worlds. I was a junior officer then, serving aboard the cruiser Asterisk Dimensional. Sword Asterisk. We jumped into their system, expecting to find a broken, frightened species ready to beg for mercy. The veterans remaining, I grew distant. Instead, we found 2 million human ships waiting for us. Crude, ugly things cobbled together from mining equipment and civilian vessels. They shouldn't have been able to hurt us. Our shields alone could. Stop anything they threw at us. He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. We were wrong about everything. The Proxima incident. Even now, years later, those words made Kethfer's blood run cold. He stared at the empty bottle in his cybernetic hand, watching the last drops of amber liquid swirl at the bottom. The memory was as clear as if it happened yesterday, burned into his mind like a brand. I was young then, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, full of pride, serving aboard the dreadnought Zethmara, biggest ship in the 7th Fleet, bristling with plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. We thought we were invincible. Jixstar leaned closer, his young eyes wide. With fascination? The cantina around them had grown quieter, as if other patrons sensed the weight of the story being told. The jump into Proxima Centauri should have been routine. Kethfer's mechanical I-word as it refocused. 300 Coalition vessels against whatever pitiful defense the humans could muster. Intelligence said they had maybe a dozen. Ships in the system, patrol craft. Nothing that could threaten a single cruiser, let alone our entire battle group. The veterans' claws scraped against the table's surface, leaving deep gouges in the metal. When we dropped out of hyperspace, our sensors went crazy. 40 contacts, all human design. Commander Deho's voice came crackling over the comm channels. Clear as starlight, Coalition Fleet, you are trespassing in human space. Turn back now, or face the consequences. 40 ships, Stur's voice cracked with disbelief. Against 300? That's what we thought too. Admiral Taishkar actually laughed when he heard it. I was on the bridge monitoring communications. He opened a channel and said, Human Commander, you have exactly 1 minute to surrender before we turn your pathetic fleet into space dust. Kethfer's remaining eye grew distant. Seeing ghosts in the smoke-filled air? Commander Deho's response was immediate. Then you have exactly 1 minute to say goodbye to your flagship. We thought it was just human bravado, empty threats from a desperate species. The old warrior reached for another bottle, his cybernetic, fingers trembling slightly. The first salvo came without warning. 40 missiles, primitive solid fuel rockets that our point defense systems should have swatted aside like insects. But these weren't normal missiles. He paused, taking a long drink. They'd somehow rigged mining charges to their warheads. Massive. Industrial explosives meant for asteroid mining, packed with enough force to crack small moons. When they hit our flagship's shields, the energy cascade was unlike anything we'd ever seen. The eternal victory was our pride and joy. 12 kilometers of hardened battle steel, shields that could withstand the fury of a dying star. It took 3 direct hits and just ... vanished. 12,000 crew members gone in an instant. The explosion was so bright, it overloaded our sensors. Jixstar's scales had gone pale. How could primitive weapons do that? Because humans don't think like us, Kethfer's voice carried a grudging respect. We build weapons to military specifications, following established patterns. Humans build weapons to kill. They don't care about elegance or efficiency. Care about results. The veteran's cybernetic arm clicked as he gestured. Captain Hyenwu commanded the human ship Defiant Spirit. Ugly little vessel, looked like someone had welded gun turrets to a cargo hauler. When our return fire crippled his engines, we expected him to surrender. Standard military protocol. Instead, he did something that haunts me to this day. Kethfer. Voice cracked with emotion. He turned his dying ship toward our command vessel and pushed the engines to overload. As his ship burned around him, I heard him screaming over the for humanity, for our children, for our future. The cantina had gone completely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade away. The defiant spirit hit the Zethmara like a meteor. The impact threw me across the bridge, shattered my ribs, broke my arm. But that wasn't the worst part. As we tried to contain the damage, more human ships were doing the same thing. Ramming attacks, suicide runs, anything to take us down with them. Kethfer's mechanical eye focused on Jixstar. Do you understand what that means, youngling? They weren't just willing to die. They were eager to die if it meant hurting us. Every human ship that day fought until complete destruction. No retreats. No surrenders. No quarter asked or given. The battle lasted 12 hours. 12 hours of the most brutal fighting I've ever witnessed. They hit us with everything they had. Modified mining equipment, civilian ships packed with explosives, even single-pilot fighters that would ram our gun turrets. The old warrior's voice grew hollow. When it was over, we'd lost 60 vessels. To their 40, the mathematics were impossible. We outnumbered them 7-1, outgunned them 1,000-1. They still made us pay in blood for every meter of space. Commander Deho went down with his ship, the last stand. Final transmission was a message to Earth. We held the line. Make them pay. Then his ship exploded, taking 2 of our destroyers with it. Jixstar stared at the table, trying to process what he'd heard. But surely that was just one battle. One exceptional human commander. Kethfer's laugh was bitter. That's what we told ourselves. High Command classified the whole thing, called it an operational setback. They said humans got lucky, caught us off guard. But those of us who were there knew better. We weren't fighting soldiers that day. We were fighting something else entirely. Something that didn't care about odds or survival or military doctrine. We were fighting a species that would rather burn the galaxy down than bow to anyone. The veteran finished his drink and stood slowly, his mechanical limbs worry. When we realized we weren't just fighting humans, we were fighting an idea. The idea that freedom was worth any price, that death was preferable to slavery. He looked down at Jixstar with his remaining eye. Ideas, youngling, are far more dangerous than weapons. The Coalition High Command was furious after Proxima. Kethfer could still remember the emergency meeting broadcasted across the entire fleet. Admiral Supreme Vorthan's face had been twisted with rage, his 4 eyes blazing with humiliation. The greatest military force in galactic history had been bloodied by a handful of primitive humans. They assembled the Grand Fleet. Kethfer's voice grew harder, like steel being forged in fire. 50,000 ships from every corner of Coalition space. Vorthan battle cruisers, Zephyrian destroyers, Mantis fighter swarms, even the dreaded Titan-class planet crackers. The largest armada in galactic history, enough firepower to reduce 100 worlds to ash. He paused, his cybernetic fingers drumming against the table. I was promoted after Proxima, given command of my own destroyer, and assigned to the advance guard under Admiral Vextel. We were the tip of the spear, the first wave that would break humanity's back. Stara's scales shimmered with nervous energy. Surely Earth couldn't stand against such force. That's what we thought too. Kethfer gestured to his missing limbs with bitter humor. This is where I lost these. Earth's orbital defenses were unlike anything we'd seen. They'd turned their moon into a fortress, bristling with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Massive railguns that could punch through our heaviest armor. Particle beam arrays that could slice a destroyer in half. The veteran's remaining eye grew distant, but that wasn't the worst part. It somehow turned their entire asteroid belt into a minefield. Thousands of rocks, each one packed with enough explosives to cripple a capital ship. We lost 100 vessels just getting into Earth's orbit. The human defense fleet was waiting for us, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. 8,000 ships all bearing the same message painted on their hulls. Earth stands, their commander. Admiral Sung-Ho opened a channel to our entire fleet. His words were simple. You want our world? Come and take it. Kethfer's claws scraped against the metal table. The space battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of the most brutal fighting I've ever witnessed. Human ships would ram our vessels, detonate themselves against our formations, anything to slow us down. They fought like demons, like beings possessed. by something beyond reason, but eventually we broke through. The Grand Fleet was too massive, too overwhelming. We established orbital bombardment positions and began glassing their cities. That's when their leader, President Minji, made her final broadcast. The old warrior's voice became haunted. I'll never forget her words. She stood in the ruins of their capital, covered in dust and blood, and said, "Today, we choose to stand. Tomorrow, we choose to fight. Always, we choose to be free." Then she declared total war. Total war? Jickstar's voice cracked. Every human became a combatant. Every man, woman, and child on the planet. They'd prepared for this moment, turned their entire world into a weapon. Underground bunkers connected by tunnels that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Hidden weapons caches in every building. Civilian populations trained in guerrilla warfare. Kethver's mechanical I-word, as it focused on something beyond the cantina walls. I led the assault on their city called Seoul. 10,000 of the Coalition's finest warriors against maybe 5,000 human defenders. We should have taken it in ours. Instead, we fought for 6 months. 6 months of hell in the ruins of their streets. Colonel Taman led the Seoul Defense Corps, turning every building into a fortress, every street into a killing field. Used the city's own infrastructure against us, flooding tunnels to drown our troops, collapsing buildings to crush our armor. The veteran's voice cracked with emotion. The worst part was the civilians. They didn't run or hide like any sane species would. They fought alongside their soldiers, using kitchen knives and improvised bombs. I watched a human child, couldn't have been more than 10 cycles old, walk up to my squad with a smile on her face. He paused, his cybernetic hand trembling. She was carrying a backpack full of explosives. Her last words were, "Remember us." Then she detonated herself, taking out my entire squad. I only survived because I was thrown clear by the blast. That's how I lost my arm and leg. But why would a child do such a thing? Jickstar's voice was barely audible. Because humans don't see death the way we do. They see it as a choice, a weapon, a final act of defiance. That child chose to die so that others might live free. It's a concept that still terrifies me. Kethfra's remaining eye glistened with unshed tears. When we finally breached the walls of Seoul, we found messages scrawled everywhere in human. Blood. We will never surrender. We will never forget. We'll never forgive. The humans had turned their own blood into ink to write their defiance on the walls. Colonel Taman was found in the city's command center, surrounded by the bodies of 100 Coalition soldiers. He'd fought to the very end, his last act being to destroy the city's central computer to deny us intelligence. Even in death, he was giving his people an advantage. The old warrior's voice grew quiet. That's when I understood what we were really fighting. It's not just a species, but an idea made flesh. The idea that freedom was worth any price, that death was preferable to slavery. We weren't just fighting humans, we were fighting the very concept of liberty itself. And ideas, youngling, are far more dangerous than any weapon ever forged. By the second year, something fundamental changed in the war. Kethver's remaining eye darted around the cantina like a hunted animal, old paranoia never quite fading. The shadows seemed deeper now, filled with memories of terror that still made his cybernetic limbs twitch. Humans stopped defending, he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of nightmares. They started hunting. The transformation had been gradual at first. After months of brutal ground fighting, the Coalition forces began noticing strange patterns. Supply convoys would disappear without a trace. Patrol ships would vanish from sensors, found weeks later. As twisted wreckage floating in deep space, communications outposts would go silent, their final transmissions cut off mid-sentence. At first we thought it was just random raids, Kethver continued, his mechanical fingers drumming nervously against the table. Desperate humans making suicidal attacks? But then we started finding the bodies. He paused, reaching for another bottle with shaking hands. Coalition soldiers, but not killed by conventional weapons. These were precision kills, surgical strikes that spoke of intimate knowledge of our anatomy. Someone had been studying us, learning our weaknesses. Jickstar leaned forward, his young eyes wide with morbid fascination. Who was doing this? Captain Wu Jin. The name came out like a curse. He commanded what they called the Ghost Fleet, 12 human ships that appeared from nowhere, struck with surgical precision, then vanished before we could respond. Their vessels were unlike anything in their regular navy, sleek, black, and completely silent, the veteran cybernetic I-word as it focused on the memory. I first encountered them near the Tau Ceti system. A destroyer Void Hunter was escorting a supply convoy when they hit us. No warning, no sensors detecting their approach. One moment space was empty, the next 12 ships were tearing through our formation like knives through silk. Their attack was perfect. Kethfer's voice grew hollow. They knew exactly where our weapons were positioned, exactly where our armor was weakest. Captain Wu Jin's flagship, the Shadow Strike, put 3 plasma bolts through our engine room. Before we could even return fire, he gestured to his missing limbs with bitter humor. That's where I lost my leg. The explosion threw me across the bridge, shrapnel from our own hull tearing through my body. But that wasn't the worst part. As I lay there bleeding, I heard Captain Wu Jin's voice over the com. What did he say? Jickstar's voice was barely audible. He spoke perfect Vorthen. Not just the words, but the accent, the inflections, everything. He said, "You came to our world as conquerors. Now you die as prey." Then they vanished, leaving us crippled and helpless. The cantina seemed to grow colder around them. Other patrons had stopped their conversations, sensing the weight of the story being told. But that was just the beginning. Kethfer continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. They'd learned our tactics, stolen our technology, and somehow improved upon it. Lieutenant Sumin single-handedly destroyed an entire Vorthen battle group using captured Coalition plasma cannons. He paused, his cybernetic hand sparking as he clenched it. She'd taken our own weapons and modified them, made them more powerful, more accurate. Crimson Tide battle group was the pride of the Vorthen fleet, 12 heavy cruisers that had never known defeat. She destroyed them all in less than an hour. The worst was Colonel Jae-sung. Kethfer's voice cracked with, "Remembered fear?" He specialized in hunting our supply lines, always one step ahead of our patrols. My commander, General Taishkar, put a bounty on his head worth an entire planet's GDP. But Jae-sung was like a ghost. He'd hit our convoys with perfect timing, always knowing exactly what we were carrying, exactly when we'd be vulnerable. His ship, the Night Stalker, became a legend among Coalition forces, a black specter that brought death in the darkness. The veterans remaining, I grew distant. I was part of the task force sent to hunt him down. 50 ships, the best crews in the Coalition Navy. We chased him for 3 months through the outer systems, always arriving just hours too late to catch him. When we finally cornered him near the Vega system, we thought we had him trapped. 50 ships against 1. But Jae-sung had been leading us into a trap. The asteroid field we'd cornered him in was filled with hidden weapons platforms, all captured. Coalition technology turned against us. Kethfer's cybernetic limbs whirred as he shifted uncomfortably. We lost 30 ships that day. Jae-sung's laughter echoed across the com channels as he destroyed us with our own weapons. His final words before vanishing were, "The hunters have become the hunted." But it wasn't just military targets. The old warrior's voice became haunted. Humans began targeting our homeworlds. They'd somehow learned to navigate our hyperspace. Lanes hitting our colonies with devastating efficiency. The attack on Vorthen Prime was the worst, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 human ships, led by Commander Hajin, penetrated our deepest defenses. They didn't target our cities or military bases. They targeted our nurseries. Our breeding grounds. Jickstar scales went pale. They attacked civilians. No, Kethfer's voice was hollow. They just appeared in our skies, broadcast a message to the entire planet. Commander Hajin's voice was calm, almost gentle. "We could destroy you all. We choose not to. Remember mercy when you return to Earth." Then they vanished. leaving us with the terrifying knowledge that our most sacred places were completely defenseless. They'd penetrated our greatest strongholds just to prove they could. The veteran's cybernetic eye focused on Jigstar. That's when we realized the truth. We were no longer the predators. We were the prey, being hunted by something far more dangerous than we'd ever imagined. Humans had become the apex predators of the galaxy, and we were just another species struggling to survive in their territory. Kethfer's voice dropped to barely a whisper, his words cutting through the cantina's smoky air like a blade. Want to know why the war really ended, youngling? It wasn't because we won. It was because we were terrified of what humans had become. Old Warrior's cybernetic hand trembled as he reached into his coat, pulling out a battered data pad. The device was old, military grade, with encryption locks that flickered weakly in the dim light. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels. The footage that made the Coalition High Command soil themselves in fear. Jigstar leaned forward, his young eyes reflecting the pale glow of the screen. The image was grainy, taken from a Coalition surveillance drone during the final days of the war. Space around Earth's moon was filled with the massive bulk of the remaining Coalition fleet. 10,000 ships. The last remnant of the once mighty Grand Fleet. The Battle of Luna Station. Kethfer's voice carried the weight of nightmares. Admiral Mungsu commanded just 500 human ships against our remaining 10,000. By all logic, it should have been a massacre. We had overwhelming firepower, superior technology, fresh reinforcements. The footage showed the human fleet taking defensive positions around the moon. Their ships looked tiny compared to the Coalition dreadnoughts, like minnows facing down sharks. But there was something different about their formation, something that made Kethfer's remaining eye narrow with remembered fear. They weren't trying to win, he continued, his cybernetic fingers tracing the scars on his face. They were buying time. Admiral Mungsu's flagship, the Last Hope, transmitted a message to our fleet. Earth needs 3 days. We'll give them 3 days. What could they possibly do in 3 days? Jigstar whispered. That's what we thought too. Kethfer's laugh was bitter. Our commanders were confident. 3 days to crush 500 ships and then glass Earth once and for all. The war. Break humanity's spirit, turn their world into a monument to Coalition power. Footage shifted, showing the opening moments of the battle. Coalition ships opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, antimatter missiles. The space around Luna Station lit up like a dying star. But something was wrong. The veteran's voice grew haunted. The humans weren't just defending. They were ... performing. Every movement was precise, calculated. They lost ships, yes, but always in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. Admiral Mungsu was conducting a symphony of destruction. His fleet moved like dancers, each ship playing its part in some greater design. They held choke points with minimal forces, sacrificed smaller vessels to protect larger ones, and always bought more time. Kethfer's mechanical eye whirred as it focused on the screen. Day 1, we lost 300 ships to their 200. Day 2, we lost 500 to their remaining 300. By day 3, we had 7,000 ships left, and they had maybe 50. But those 50 ships, he paused, his voice cracking, they fought like demons. Admiral Mungsu's Last Hope took on 3 Coalition dreadnoughts simultaneously. His ship was falling apart, atmosphere venting from a dozen hull breaches, but he kept fighting. The footage showed the final moments of the human flagship. Explosions rippled across, its hull, weapon systems failing one by one. But even as it died, it continued firing, its guns blazing defiance into the void. Admiral Mungsu's last transmission will haunt me forever. Kethfer's voice was barely audible, said, Earth stands, humanity endures. The dawn comes for all of us. Then his ship exploded, taking 2 of our dreadnoughts with it. But that wasn't the end. The old warrior's remaining eye met Jigstar. That was when everything changed. As the last human ship died, our sensors detected something that made our blood freeze. Ships were approaching from deep space, not human. Ships, not coalition ships. Something else entirely.
What was it?
Jixstar breathed. We never found out.
Oh.
But the intercepted communications spoke of Project Damocles weapons, specifically designed to destroy each coalition species. Bioweapons that could end the Vorthan race in days. Planet killers that made our dreadnoughts look like toys. Kethver's cybernetic hand sparked as he clenched it. The transmissions we intercepted were terrifying. Scientists discussing how to target Vorthone genetic markers, engineers talking about stellar manipulation weapons, military commanders debating whether to spare coalition colonies or cleanse them entirely. Then Premier Jiwoo delivered the final ultimatum herself. The veteran's voice dropped to a whisper. She approached our entire fleet in a single shuttle. One small craft against 10,000 warships. She should have been vaporized the moment she entered our defensive perimeter. Instead, our guns wouldn't fire. Every weapon system in the fleet had been disabled by some kind of virus. Uploaded during the battle with Admiral Mungsu's forces, we were helpless, floating in space like sitting ducks. The datapad showed a recording of Premier Jiwoo's final message. She stood in the shuttle's tiny cockpit, her face calm but her eyes burning with an intensity that made it even harden coalition. Veterans stepped back from their screens. Her words were simple. Kethver continued. She said, "We could have wiped you out months ago. We chose mercy. We could end your species tomorrow. We choose restraint.
Ow.
Leave now, or learn why humans are apex predators." The shuttle's cargo bay opened, revealing something that made our intelligence officers scream. Technical specifications for weapons that shouldn't exist. Blueprints for devices that could turn stars into bombs. Biological agents that could rewrite DNA on a planetary scale. Quantum viruses that could destroy entire civilizations through their communication networks. Jixstar's scales had gone completely pale. She was bluffing. She had to be. That's what we hoped. Kethver's cybernetic limbs whirred as he shifted uncomfortably, until she demonstrated one of their minor weapons. A small device, no bigger than my fist, that she activated with a simple command. The nearest coalition outpost, a military station 3 light-years away, simply vanished, not destroyed. Not damaged, vanished. Our sensors couldn't detect any trace of it ever existing. 12,000 coalition personnel, gone without a trace. Premier Jiwoo's voice was still calm as she said, "That was a demonstration. We have larger versions, much larger. Your choice, Admiral. Peace or extinction." The veteran's remaining eye glistened with unshed tears. The coalition withdrew that same day. Officially, we achieved our objectives. Unofficially, we ran with our tails between our legs, grateful that humanity had chosen to let us live. High Command classified everything, buried the reports, made sure no one would ever know how close. We came to complete annihilation. But those of us who were there, we remember. We remember the fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that we'd awakened something that should have been left sleeping. Kethver stood slowly, his cybernetic limbs worried with each movement. His remaining eye fixed on Jixstar with an intensity that made the young soldier shrink back. "So, tell me, younglings still want to fight humans?" Jixstar shook his head. Thoroughly chastened, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Good," Kethver growled, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Because next time we meet them, I pray it's as friends. Because if it's as enemies again, ... He paused at the cantina door, his mechanical eye glowing red in the darkness. "There won't be a next time for us." The old warrior disappeared into the station's corridors, leaving only the echo of his words and the lingering smell of fear. Jixstar sat alone in the darkened cantina, staring at the empty bottles and trying to process what he'd learned. In the distance, a human freighter was docking at the station. Its captain, a young woman named Sujin, was laughing with her crew. As they prepared to unload their cargo, she had no idea that her very presence was enough to make hardened coalition veterans wake up screaming. The war was over. Humanity had won. And the galaxy would never be the same. The end.